PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. I'm reporting back on day 2 of the semi-finals in the Weissenhaus Freestyle tournament. So that's Fischer Random Chess. Now, if you remember, Magnus Carlsen was defeated by Vincent Keymer in game 1. So game 2, Carlsen was in a must-win situation. Here's the end of it. Carlsen playing white. Now, he huffed and puffed in an endgame with an extra pawn, but Keymer hung on. Now, here's the end of the game. Rook h2. Yup, Carlsen has an extra pawn, but this bishop is loose. And Keymer's king and knight and rook very active. So, this is a problem. Rook d6 check. Okay, the king's pushed back. And Carlsen came back to defend the bishop, but now this is pinned. Knight takes pawn. Of course, that can't be taken because the rook hangs. Rook c2. Oh my word, scary. It's a pin. Panic not. Rook h3 check. And here the players agree to a draw. Well, that king can't step up because of rook takes pawn. And, well, of course, it's possible to put the rook in the way. That would just be a draw. Or if the king goes back, then, of course, this is just a draw as well. So at this point, the players agreed to a draw. So that meant that Vincent Keymer went through to the final. Fantastic achievement, defeating Magnus Carlsen, who looked like he was starting to motor. So let's concentrate on the other semi-final. So Carlsen Sindarov against Fabiano Caruana. This was incredibly tense. The first 2 games, if I can find them, first 2 games were... No, that's not the position I want to look at. Just a moment, folks. That's the game I want to look at. So the first 2 games with the classical time control were drawn. Then they played 2 10-minute games. So the time control is getting faster and faster. Those were drawn. So the tiebreak went to 2 blitz games. And this is the first of these blitz games. So this was such a tense match. And it was all came down to tactical awareness and strong nerves. So Caruana playing white in this first blitz game. He's got a great position. You can see that black's pawns have been shattered. I mean, this looks like a proper game of chess rather than Fischer Random, has to be said. But all white's pieces, those pawns are not great, but all Caruana's pieces look pretty well placed, whereas black's are a little bit passive. And here, if Caruana plays knight a4, threatening this pawn, tying black's knight down and playing queen f2, that's a nice move, preventing black's rook from reaching the open file. Caruana's in control. But instead he played queen d1, which, okay, it looks like a very decent move, actually. Just ganging up on this pawn. But this is where the game started to turn. Bishop e6, good move. Nice move. I mean, that's a very easy move to miss in a blitz game. Of course, if that's exchanged, then that improves black's structure and the rook magically defends the d-pawn. Very nice move. So Caruana retreated, but then the rook was able to come into play on the a file, and suddenly you can see how things have turned around. I mean, there were more inaccuracies, and basically Sindarov took the initiative on the queen side. King c1, and just in a space of a few moves, it looks really ugly. You can see that in this position, all black's pieces are in play. The king is in massive trouble. It's incredible how things have turned around. And Caruana duly went down in this game. Queen a3 check, final move. Because if king d2, queen takes rook check. Caruana resigned in that position. An absolute shocker. So Sindarov won the first blitz game. So he needed just a draw in the second game to win the match and go through to the final. Well, let's join the game at move 32. And you can see that the pawns have coalesced into a King's Indian kind of structure. So you can see, this familiar pawn chain and black's pawns here. So they're locked together. Black Caruana doesn't really have much of an attack on the king side. Sindarov has packed the king side here. And so he's very secure. This bishop ties black's bishop down. It looks like white has the advantage here. So Sindarov went for it on the queen side with queen a7. It's still quite tricky. Can white afford to send the queen right over that side of the board, going on a pawn grab? Well, here is where Caruana had a chance. He could have played knight takes pawn. And this gives black excellent counterplay. You can see that while the queen is away, then black has a chance. And, well, all we can say is that black has excellent compensation for the piece, with potentially a second pawn rolling in. But instead, Caruana played queen h4. I should say that both players play absolutely down to the wire on time. They were just playing on increment at this point. Just seconds left. Queen h4 mistake. Queen takes b5. Now that allows the queen to rejoin the defences. Caruana realised, well, this is the only chance to stir things up, but actually it's just too late, because here Sindarov could just kill all black's play with queen d3. Once white wins the piece with a queen, black is completely dead because white is in control. But Sindarov missed it, and instead he took the knight. And now Caruana had a chance, f3. Well, Sindarov took this one. So at least he's managed to eliminate that dangerous pawn. And now if the queen rejoins the defense with queen e2, then actually white is fine. White can hold that position. But instead, Sindarov played a check. He must have thought that the combination of queen and rook and potentially the bishop would be enough to win. But a cool move, instead of the king retreating, allowing a mate, bishop e7 from Caruana. That holds for just enough time for black to attack at the other end of the board, and it's game over. Rook f1 check, and here Sindarov resigned. The rook retreats, and queen e4 is checkmate. An absolute shocker. This was so tense, with the players going right down to the wire on time and the advantage swinging back and forth. So that meant they went into an Armageddon game. So in this, very interesting rules, the players bid for time. So basically in an Armageddon game, black is in a must-win situation. I've got that wrong. White is in a must-win situation. I beg your pardon. Black has draw odds. If the game is drawn, black goes through. So white is in a must-win situation, and the players bid to play black. And the shortest time you bid, then you will get the black pieces. So Caruana bid 4 minutes 15 to play with black. That's the time he would get. And Sindarov, I think he bid 4:45. So that meant that Caruana would be playing with black. He played with 4 minutes 15 seconds. Sindarov played with 5 minutes. But white in a must-win situation. Okay, here we go. So let's go right from the start. So that's the starting position, c4. Very interesting strategy from Caruana. So he makes the break straight away, and that leaves a more known position on the board, as we don't get a sort of very strange structure. I mean, this is a very sort of normal structure for traditional chess. So the knight's coming out, okay. Sindarov gaining a little bit of time with this knight, but black's piece is actually pretty well placed. And both sides castle. There's that weird casting move. So actually we've got a pretty normal position on the board. And that's what Caruana was trying to achieve when he played this early break with d5. And now we've got exchanges. Well, Sindarov is a little bit more active with his pieces, but you can see that we've got a very normal position on the board. It reminds me of one of those sort of Queen's Gambit positions where the pawns get exchanged on the C and D files. So Sindarov has to go for it. So he's stirring things up. He's playing for complications. He wants to embed that knight on c6. But actually you can see that Caruana has developed very nicely. And by this stage, well, he's going to expel that knight. And things are looking very comfortable for black. Sindarov retreated this knight, but that's loose. And Caruana won a pawn. So Caruana just needs to draw. He's a pawn up in a very stable position. Well, this is a dream for black. But Sindarov tried to complicate. He's still looking to play that knight in somewhere. So Caruana had to be very careful here. So the knight went in. Sindarov had to try and stir things up. So how would Caruana play this? Would he try to simplify more? Would he try to win that knight on c7? It's very interesting. He played knight d7, hitting the bishop, which has to maintain control over the knight. Bishop came back. Caruana played b5. Okay, hits this bishop, slightly loosens that bishop on c5. Now, if bishop b3, I suspect that Caruana had simply intended bishop b6. Black is very stable. It's very hard to get that knight out. So Sindarov, after b5, played knight e6. So he's managed to complicate the position. He's given up a piece, but you can see there are pins here, potentially a pin here as well. Caruana played bishop b6, trying to exchange pieces. So an exchange here and rook d1. Now this is a critical moment in this Armageddon game. These pins are looking pretty nasty. That bishop is also lurking here. Can pop out to h4. So here's my question for you. How does black escape this tricky position? Black to play. You have a think. I'll have a drink. Cheers. Well, Caruana, in spite of this being a blitz game, an Armageddon game, managed to hold his nerve. He kept his cool and negotiated the tactics with this move, rook e8. Excellent move. And the point is that if bishop takes knight, the rook steps back. And that is a nasty pin. So if bishop g4, protecting the rook, well, that can just be taken. It's crucial, of course, that this rook is protected. So very nice spot from Caruana. So rook d6 played by Sindarov. He hasn't given up yet. Caruana played the knight back to f8. Excellent move. So again, more tactics. So if bishop takes bishop, rook takes, this is the game. And of course, if rook takes bishop, there's a back rank checkmate. This looks like normal chess. So king f1 played, bishop c5. Well, Caruana gave up a second pawn, but he has got out of all those pins. King e2, b4. So Caruana is stabilizing. And knight d7 attacks the bishop. And here Sindarov resigned. He'd had enough. He could see that Caruana was emerging. Black only needs a draw. So the bishop is attacked. Knight c5, check with a fork is threatened. So bishop d4 is the only move. And then, for example, this is the most sensible. So with a rook and bishop against a rook, very stable position, and Sindarov resigned in that position. So by the skin of his teeth, Caruana went through to the final. So we've got a final of Fabiano Caruana against Vincent Keymer. So again, we've got a battle between youth. Vincent Keymer, I think he's 20 years old. Caruana, I think he's 32 years old. Let me check that. He's been on the scene for a very long time as Fabi. Fabiano is, yes, he's 32. That's right. 32-year-old against a 20-year-old. So that's going to be very, very interesting. Thanks for watching.